So the general idea of the account user working group is to try to parallel the improvements we've made in simplifying the protocol with OAuth 2 by trying to achieve some of the same simplicity on the user experience. So there's, right now within the OpenID community, we use the term NASCAR to refer to basically the best user experience we know how to do, which is to take a bunch of buttons and put them up on a login page. It works, and unfortunately there are a lot of known problems with it. So this is a screenshot of Yahoo's login page, and Andy later will be able to talk about some of the optimizations that Yahoo does with their flow after you've logged in once or twice. Now, what we've been trying to do as a community, and I would say this has been going on for years, is to take different best practices from different groups and different communities, some from Qatar, some from InfoCard, some from OpenID, try to figure out what works well, what didn't, and actually merge them together. And also, as we've started to get more and more deployments in the wild, we've been able to get experience on, okay, what causes users to call help desk? What do they complain about? And as we've gotten more experience, we've been able to tune for these types of things. And then something that's further complicated this in the last 2 years has been the preponderance of mobile devices, which honestly makes things like signing up and signing in even more painful. And in a lot of cases, we found optimizing for the mobile device forces you to take an approach that, in hindsight, works pretty darn well for the desktop. But of all the different things that we looked at, I would say the general technique that in user experience worked the best is the concept of an identity selector, which most of us have seen in operating systems like Windows 7, any version of Windows, Mac, et cetera. And InfoCard in particular, for those of you all are familiar with it, spent a lot of time on trying to take this model and add it to the browser. What we've tried to do now with this group, working group we call the Account User Working Group, is to take that idea of an identity selector, but add it to any web browser. So you don't actually need to change web browsers, you don't need a new version of web browser. Just work on any web browser you have today, including the mobile browsers that are actually out there. And the general idea is trying to get to a point where users don't think about signing in or signing up. They just think about literally selecting the picture of the account they want to use. And that, in this example, you'll notice we're using 2 pictures for the woman to indicate, some people have 2, we can debate the word personas or whatever you want to call them. In this case, a work and a personal, but also sharing a device with her husband. So what I'm going to start by doing is showing a demo that some of y'all may have seen in other events or online of how the key components of the account user work. And then after that, I want to talk about the status of actually this work within the OpenID Foundation and working to put together to move this forward. So what I'm going to, great, I'm getting eaten alive by a bug up here. What I'm going to start with is the example of okay, that's still attacking me. Who's really good? Coming for last. I'm going to start with the example of a Yahoo user. This example, her name is Sarah. So she's a Yahoo Mail user. She's already logged into Yahoo Mail. And she comes across some website that she's never dealt with before, but she wants to log in, someone's maybe to make a purchase or something like that. She sees a traditional sign-in action, goes ahead and clicks that. On the next screen, she's presented with something that's sort of a mix of our NASCAR-style approach with a bunch of buttons, as well as this what we'll call escape hash to enter her email address. And what we find of people who go here, if they actually see their button list up at the top, about 85% of people, the first time they come through, will click the button. The other 15% of time, even if Yahoo's list up there, they'll type their email address. On return visits to this site or others, it quickly jumps up to about 100% if they see their button listed. So she can go ahead and click Yahoo. What this is going to do is actually start an OpenID flow over to the Yahoo identity provider. She can then consent to the information she wants to share with the site and will be bounced back. So that part's pretty traditional. Now, I'm going to sign out here. What I now want to show you is going to another website. In this case, it happens to be Google's photo sharing services, Google Picasa. So she could certainly come here and say, oh, I want to come to this site and also sign in. And if she clicks sign in, she's going to see a much different experience than the traditional Google login box. Google has actually deployed something we call the account chooser, as we're talking about in this working group. It's actually live. Anyone can opt into it today. I'll be talking about the status of that, but right now I just want to go through the demo. So she could come to Google, say, great, I want to use the photo editing service, choose Yahoo, go through the same flow of being sent to Yahoo, give her consent, and come back. And once she does, similarly, she would be logged in. See how fast my internet connection is. Now, one of the things that we're actually doing behind the scenes is we found that sadly about 20% of users who come to Google, and maybe I didn't actually click agree. Oh, that's it, just waiting. About 20% of the users who come to Google and go through the account creation process, we find are actually trying to create an account from an email address that's already registered at Google. And they get themselves into pretty nasty flows where they try to fill out a big long form, and after they've done all that, we give them like errors of your password's not right or your account exists, or we don't want them to do dictionary attacks, so we have to actually keep from giving out too much information. So it ends up being extremely painful for the user. So in this case, actually, what we've done is Yahoo just asserted to Google that, hey, the person at the computer is Sarah Corlett at yahoo.com. We looked up in our system and said, oh, well, actually, there's already an existing Google account for that address. Traditionally, the person logged in with a password, but hey, I'll trust Yahoo to assert that email address, just as I'll trust them if I need to do a password reset. So we actually just immediately logged the user into that account. I'm going to log out here. And let me go back to the first site. So let's say later the same user, they want to come back and visit this site a second time on the same computer, goes ahead and clicks sign in. Well, now instead of seeing that list of buttons and email addresses, she actually sees what we would call the account chooser, a list of the accounts she's previously used on this website, on this computer. And if she wants to log in, all she has to do is click her picture. She'll be bounced to Yahoo, bounce back, and be logged in. While I'm waiting for that over to Google, it's the same thing. She comes back to this website, and keeps an idea of the accounts that she's used on this website, on this computer, goes ahead, clicks her picture, and sorry, my internet connection is still a little slow. Hey, can you do 2 OpenID logins to Yahoo in parallel at the same time? Well, hopefully one of the key things, though, that you'll notice that actually between these 2 different sites, one is Google, one is not, we try to have a very consistent user experience between them for a couple different parts of the flow. One part was obviously the aspect of just choosing an account, actually seeing a list of accounts, and we'll show more modes of this later. Second one being the actual flow of adding an account to it. And the third being the actual experience of signing in the first time. So great, now she's logged in. I'll do the same thing over here.
So the choice between accounts, not combining one sort of accounts, is the same login?
Not at this time, correct. So,
That's
yeah.
Several sites do.
Eric,
Yeah.
in this instance, would you, if Sarah logged into Casa and then went to Google Plus or went to a different Google property, would it recognize that she authenticated across all of Google's properties, or just the one that she authenticated?
Google already will do single sign-in across all of our properties, and so we're not planning on changing that.
Okay, so kind of when you have your, looking through this, when you have multiple users, you
Which are
still
going to show
have
in
single sign-in across all of it, and then you can sign out and sign in with any of the other ones that you have shown.
I find people need that ability, especially if some websites they're dealing with on their personal accounts on their work account, right?
I noticed all of your providers seem to say like Gmail, AOL Mail, Yahoo Mail.
Yeah.
Are you actually using this? I mean, was it Sarah at yahoo.com or whatever it was? Are you actually using that as an email address, or are you simply using kind of adopting the email syntax in order to refer to user? And
so you're giving me an intro to my next part of the demo. Go ahead, and I think that'll help with that. So I was trying to get a point across that we're trying to see if we could achieve a very consistent, experience for signing in and signing up across, different websites. And there are 3 parts of that. But I want to come to your point in particular. There are 3 elements where we wanted to see what consistency we could achieve. The first one is, if you look at this sign-in button up here, and the other version that we had in Google, as I'll bring that back in a moment, they actually use the same visual icon for this little, what we call keyhole icon next to the button. So one of the things that Google has seen with our relying parties, who become a relying party Google, is just the addition of a Google button or a Facebook button or a Yahoo button near their sign-in experience actually causes more people to start the flow because they feel like, oh great, I won't have to do one of that really annoying processes. This will be more simple. So it actually tends to lead more people into the flow. Well, if you start supporting a lot of identity providers, there's a limit. You can't put buttons all over the place. So we wanted to have a more generic visual image that would indicate to them, hey, I've come to a site. I don't yet know what identity providers it supports, but it's one of those sites that actually does its best to simplify my sign-in and sign-up experience. So that's why we're using this keyhole icon for that purpose. The second one is after a user has chosen an account. And earlier I showed this idea of adding accounts. This page is also designed to be somewhat visually consistent across websites. The idea being that the process of adding an account is a one-time operation. It may be a little bit more painful for the user, but you only do it once ever per site per computer. However, the list of identity providers here is not designed to be globally consistent. We assume some websites might have none. Some websites will have 1, 2, could even have 4. Some websites are going to choose to support social networks or only email providers or a mix. Another thing, and this has been very important to Google, is Google's been trying to recruit more international identity providers for a while. In particular, we wanted to convince a number of international companies to become identity providers so we could become relying parties to them. When we've talked to them, the number one complaint they've said is, hey Eric, I hear terms like crowded out by the NASCAR effect. That there are only going to be a certain number of buttons out there shown. So who's going to show my web.de or mail.ru button? I'll never get listed, so why should I bother? But one of the things we found we can do with this technique is actually customize the list of buttons based on things like IP geolocation or the language in the user's browser. So when Google talks with these identifiers, what we tell them is, hey, in the future what we're going to do is if we see a user who's in this add account flow and they're in a Russian IP address, I'm not going to show the AOL button, sorry. I'm going to show the mail.ru button. Or if you're a, God, this fly really loves me, sorry. Or social networks, obviously Facebook very popular all around the world, but there are obviously other social networks very popular in Japan, China, Brazil, India, etc. So instead of having one global NASCAR list, for the world, you can actually customize this both on your website and both on things like IP geolocation. And then the last one is what we call sort of the fallback, that if the user doesn't see their identity provider here, they can still type their email address. So say the AOL user happens to be traveling in Russia and is using WebCafe. If they want to log into Google and they don't see their button, oh darn, they can at least still type their email address. From that, we can look up their identity provider and then actually go ahead and get them logged in. So there's both some variants, some things we're trying to be consistent and not. So we've shown this working for users who actually have an identity provider, but the reality is there's still a lot of people out there who don't have an identity provider, or at least their email provider is not one. And primarily when we've designed this type of experience, we've been talking to medium and large websites and trying to find out what it would take to convince them to move to technologies like OpenID. And the larger the website, not surprisingly, the more users they already have logging into their system. People are used to logging in with a password, and so they have a lot of reasonable concerns, especially after the experiences of some other websites, of how do they migrate their users to this federated login approach. So let me, yeah.
It may be obvious, but not to me, but you're showing all the email providers. Does this why aren't the social network providers not?
In this particular demo, I don't have them working. There's another demo I was going to show later today.
In principle,
it doesn't matter. Yeah, so if you want to play with that on your desk, OpenIDSampleStore.com/advanced. I think has a Windows Live button, a Facebook button, a Google button. You can play with it.
So you're linking all that?
Right now it's just those, but this is the design here is to be agnostic to the protocol. Okay?
So how, if you have a Facebook account, for example, and you were confronted with this dialogue, how would you log in with your Facebook? Because you don't have your email, your Facebook doesn't have
an email. Right.
It's not like.
So one of the actual things that we found is sort of a more generic problem that users have is, let's say you run across a website that does have buttons for multiple identifiers and it's using more traditional NASCAR UI. If a user goes there and they do log in with a Google button or a Facebook button, many times when they come back to the site, they can't remember which one they used. Right? We've actually especially seen this as a problem for websites that have been relying parties for a while. And for example, sorry to any ex-MySpace people here, who might have had a MySpace button for a while that people were using, and then people wanted to switch to starting to log in with their Facebook button. So one of the nice things here is a user goes through a one-time process of adding their account to the computer. Once they've done that, there's enough knowledge, either in the cookie on the computer or by just pulling back to the server to find out what is the registered identity provider for that address. So, once a user has gone and picked their identity provider, on this page, they do that once ever, and then in the future, they're just going to see their list of accounts. That will actually know what identity provider they have.
Okay, but if I'm walking up to a public terminal and I want to log into a Google account, right, you're not giving me an opportunity at all to use my Facebook identity to log in.
And that's what I'm saying. There's nothing about the account user that controls what identity providers you support. Google might not have support for that yet, but other relying parties can add any identity providers.
Right, but I'm saying that you're not allowing me to do that.
Right.
Because you're restricting me to email address or one of the 4 buttons.
That particular website is. So here, I'll bring up an example.
This is Google.
Google, sure.
It's not the particular website. I mean, Google is basically saying I can shut out using your Facebook account to log in unless you have to go somewhere else and then go to Google.
Let's see if I can get this one to come up. So we've got other demos that do integration with the social network. To be honest, my goal here is just to show variances of the different UI and to show that it's up to relying parties to decide, because I don't want to specify to relying parties that every relying party should support every identity provider. I'm actually not a big proponent of that because I've learned that a lot of the identity providers out there are not secure or honestly not particularly privacy sensitive or have lots of other usability problems. So if you want to play with one of those, just go to openidsamplestore.com/advanced. And you'll notice, one of the interesting differences is, sorry, I'll have to come back to this site. And I think to mention this button here, it doesn't say Google, it says Gmail. So Google, about half of our accounts are Gmail accounts, half are not. So when this website chooses to just let Gmail users log in, well, it's taking advantage of theoretically half of the value that Google can provide. Whereas this other one over here happens to choose to show a Google button and can do more. Now, what we unfortunately find, and you could talk more about this, is it is a little bit more work to deal with an identity provider who's not an email provider, because you have to deal with, honestly, things like email address changes. Your Gmail address, we don't let your Gmail address change, nor does Hotmail or Yahoo allow you to do that. But if you have a Google account or Twitter account, Facebook account, you can change your email address all you want. And you can run into, unfortunately, nasty situations where, for example, an identity provider asserts one email address one time, it matches one account, the user changes it a few weeks later, all of a sudden, the new email address matches one account of the website, the old address matches a different account of the website. You have to start asking users what to do. That's actually just work that the relying party has to do, honestly, unrelated to this user experience. If they're willing to do that extra work, fantastic. If they don't want to do that extra work, then they can start in the more basic mode and add that later.
So you can't have you had talked in the beginning of your presentation about when you log into your Windows computer, when you log into Windows, your Windows identity happens for all those apps, and you're essentially logging into Outlook and so forth.
That would be an eventual goal to get to here.
But you can't do that here when you log in once.
Per website.
People really want to have that experience where they've logged in once to their device,
Correct.
And then all the websites are available to them already sort of pre-logged in when they go to it.
So hopefully people will come to IIW, because that is one of the specific goals that's also been talked about in the community, is how could you bootstrap the list of accounts here? How could a user come to a website that they've never visited before, but when they click sign in, as you say, immediately see the list of accounts that are known to exist on this device? Now, we've done that in the past with actually extending the browser and actually putting bits in the browser. SAML community has done it with common domains, which you can pull. So there are other techniques you can use there. To be honest, with the time we have today, I wasn't going to get into that, but we're going to do a couple sessions at IIW about it, right? So as much as we're talking about OpenID and all that, I wanted to quickly show that there's still the need for websites to deal with users who, for example, have never registered an identity provider with their account, or who have been logging into a website for years with an account. So Here, a user comes to this site, Frank at Comcast.net, maybe, they've been a customer of this site for years, they used to log in with the password, fine, there's nothing to stop them from doing that. They'll get asked for their password, they'll enter it, boom, they're logged in. Or similarly, the last scenario is someone who comes to the site and wants to create a new account. So,
How did you get Frank's name when you didn't, in picture, when you just entered his email address?
I actually typed his password really quickly on the next screen.
Oh, it looked like it showed up before you typed the password.
Yeah, it doesn't. So, here you have a user who has to actually go through a traditional registration process. If the user is not willing to use an identity provider, again, up to the website whether they're going to support that or not. But we now supported, 4 different types of accounts. What we'll call a legacy account that already has a password, a legacy account that hasn't registered, an account that can use OpenID to create a new account, or an account that's being upgraded from using a password OpenID. So we wanted to find one single experience that covered all 4 user types. Now, as we were going through this, one of the things that we found as a significant user experience problem with computers is computers either shared by multiple people, and I more mean home computers rather than like a web cafe computer. There's becoming less and less of a problem today. And mobile devices, where in particular you have people who have at least a personal and work account, if not others with them. So one of the nice things is that once a user has started associating multiple accounts with this website on the device, when they go to the sign out option, which they're used to using, one of the things the website can do is also promote the option for a user to switch accounts. So maybe you have a computer shared by a husband and wife, or even a single person who uses the same website for work and personal. A lot of times it's annoying. You have to just completely sign out of the site and retype everything to just switch back and forth. So here instead, you can just click the list of accounts, choose that say, maybe the wife just walked up to the computer, and she can switch over and become the active user on the device. So those were showing examples of, as I said, federated users and the legacy users. The one last example that I wanted to show for this audience in particular is sort of the long tail IDPs. So we don't list every IDP in the world here. As you said, one of our goals is to get more IDPs, especially international ones. So what if someone types an email address for a domain that does have an identifier, but that isn't listed here? Now I actually have to go to my cheat sheet and make sure I get the email address and password for this one correctly. Sorry. And thank you to the VMware people who provided the testing that we're actually about to use. So let's say a user just goes to this website and types their corporate email address and clicks go. If the website is able to detect that there is a known identity provider for that domain, that's one that it actually supports, it can redirect the user over there. Traditionally, the user would already be logged in, but just to make things more interesting, we'll actually show this user logging into their corporate identity provider, who happens to require multi-factor authentication. In this case, just to keep it simple, the second factor of authentication isn't a password, it's just a secret Q&A. So we'll answer those. And now once the user is actually authenticated to their corporate identity provider, they'll eventually get the standard consent page of, hey, do they want to share their information with this website? So when they go ahead and click OK, they're now logged into this site. And sign out and come back in again. Now, I've sort of talked about this before. One of the nice things is the user's gone through this slightly painful process inside. They have to type their email address from scratch, get bounced around, come back. But once they've done that once on this website, they don't have to have their identity providers button listed. They just come back, click the entry for the account they've added. Between the website and the QuickTime machine, they can figure out the user's identity provider, bounce them to there, and bounce them back. So that's one of the key things we want to if your identity provider isn't listed, it's still just a one-time operation to add the account. and future logins are going to be a lot simpler. Now, one other thing, this one I'm not going to have time for before I want to do some of the other content that we're seeing on, again, computers that are shared either by multiple people or a person with a work and personal account, is the situation that we have with Google a lot. So I spent a lot of time talking with the relying parties to Google and trying to find out what are their complaints, what do users dislike. One of the most common ones I hear is a computer shared by a husband and wife, where the husband and wife both have Google accounts. The husband walks up to a website, clicks the Google button, he's logged in, yay, and he starts doing something. He doesn't realize that when he went to the bathroom, his wife came and logged into her Gmail account, and all of a sudden he's logged into this website as her. Right? Especially in some situations where you're posting your own content that maybe gets out to shared contacts, this can actually start being embarrassing. Most complaints I hear are actually computers shared by kids and their parents, and it's mostly the kids complaining about the stupid thing their parents do, because the kids seem to notice when they're logged into the wrong account, but the parents don't. So another advantage of this technique is if a user does come along, like the husband comes along and picks his account, when he's actually bounced to Google, if he comes back, if the account asserted by Google or any IDP doesn't match the one that the user selected, the website can actually tell, oh wait, there's a mismatch here, and it can show an error message to the user. Now, if the identity provider supports some of the more advanced techniques of OpenID or OpenID Connect, it's actually possible for the relying party to tell the identifier, hey, I know the person wants to be this specific account, so on your site, make sure to get them logged into that one. And this starts to work particularly well. This is more of a fancy one, but in Google's case, it's possible to get logged into multiple accounts at Google at the same time, one for personal, one for corporate, for example. So if you do go to a website and you click the Google button, today we have to always ask you, okay, well, which of these accounts do you want to use? Now you go to the website, just simply click an account, boom, you're done. So we're taking some steps out of the process. So I'm showing all these demos on PC browser, but as I mentioned at the beginning, most of this design came out of trying to optimize the experience for mobile devices. So if you use some of the demo sites and try it out on an iPhone or Android, you actually get to see some of the more interesting parts of the experience. So here are the demo sites, account-chooser.appspot.com if you want to try that one, or if you just do a search for account chooser experiment, you can turn it on within Google. But what I actually wanted to talk about a little bit more today is the status of actually trying to make this technique available to a wider audience. So a group of us had submitted to the OpenID Foundation a proposal to create a working group to focus on a spec in this area. That's now been approved, and later this week I'll actually send out a message about the mailing list that we've created to get the work going in this space. But if you want to actually start taking a peek, there's a website that we've created. There's a website we created called accountchooser.com, which if you go to it, you can start reading about some of the, down the bottom, or some of the problems that we were trying to deal with, forgotten accounts, trying to be protocol agnostic, deal with legacy users and passwords. So it talks about some of the specific problems we were trying to solve. Now there's also some screenshots of slightly more updated visual mocks of what we're trying to do in this space. And one of the things that we plan on doing, at least for Google and Google's implementation, is having down at the very bottom of this page, learn more about this link. So if a user encounters this for the first time, in our usability experiments, we find actually, so far no one has actually clicked on help links, but if they actually do want to learn more about it, they'll actually be brought back to this site, accountchooser.com, where there's information targeted for website owners and for identifiers. So Google shows login boxes to billions of users, and if we can get even a small percentage of them to start clicking through and learning about this technique, we want to actually convince more website operators that, hey, we are now at the point where we have a simple user experience you can use to migrate your users from password to federated login. And so we're going to be working with the marketing subcommittee of the OpenID Foundation to manage the site, because we want to help communicate to website owners that, hey, there are tools that you can use to implement this. JanRain, it's Login Helper, and Google's Identity Toolkit already support this, as well as point them, if they want to actual spec work and user interface guidelines for how they can build this themselves. So there's already a web page up there right now with just visual design elements of how they might build this, or what suggested CSS HTML is, to try to be visually consistent. And then I mentioned that there's now a formal working group to try to actually create a very specific spec about this. And we actually have an initial draft spec that's actually already posted. It is pretty long because there's a lot of description about the user interaction flow, all the different edge cases that our website might want to handle. Now that we have the working group, Google's going to contribute our IP in this area to that group, and then hopefully at the next IIW start having more significant discussions about how to move this forward. Trent, good question.
So the output is some kind of standard-based solution. Well, right. So the question is, are you talking standards light or specified standards by the body, and is the OpenID Foundation the right place for a protocol agnostic UI specification?
Right, so we already have some past experience with the OpenID Foundation of doing user experience optimizations of protocol, as we did with pop-up extension. In this case, we're trying to be protocol agnostic, in particular between OpenID v2 and OpenID Connect. Happens to be as soon as you've done that, if you're agnostic to two protocols, it works with others like SAML and others. But because we're in this time period of trying to, to migrate from OpenID v2 to OpenID Connect, it's important for us to think about that. Google today is already a relying party to Microsoft using OAuth 2 and to Yahoo and AOL using OpenID v2. And so we had to spend quite a bit of time actually trying to figure out what was the right places to separate the protocol aspects from the visual design aspects. And we've actually put that in the spec. Here is where we suggest you draw the line so that you can hide from these things. One of the things we're hoping to get people to work on, but to be honest, I haven't been able to get anyone else interested yet, is defining a very standard interface between a JavaScript implementation for some of the user interface aspects of an account user and a server-side implementation. Google already has one example of that out right now. I'm going to try to convince people at IIW to work with us to see if we could standardize that even further. Kevin,
so if you do have a site that expects you to have login emails as a login, LinkedIn is a good example where...
Right. And Google does as well, actually. Not many people know that, but yes. You can have multiple emails so to a single account. Yeah.
How do you supposed to explain the distinction between choosing between the accounts and doing a second login to the same account?
Right. Most of those problems, honestly, we have here regardless of how the user authenticated.
Yeah.
Like I say, we have this feature in Google, and most of the people who have it enabled can't figure out how to use it. So we do try to differentiate between, what's the account that you were authorized to access, and then what content you're seeing.
But you mentioned I can't remember which one I logged in with probably.
Right.
I think the one I've seen that did that really well was Friendly, where if you went in and go, I think you've already got an account. Do you want to merge them now?
Correct. Right. TripIt does a good job of that as well. But again, because they actually are merging accounts and then having one authentication context across them. Others do sharing across them. So I think while that's here, at the end of the day, another thing that's more generic across this is more and more websites are trying to keep users logged in longer, especially on mobile devices. We've gotten good enough at security. There's not a lot of need for the user to keep on re-authenticating. So in a perfect world, a user will go once to a device, add the list of accounts that they frequently authenticate as, and any website where they are, they just pick which one they want to be active. Hopefully they will get out of the business of typing passwords a lot.
Right. And I was thinking that flow, I may have more than one account in, and I noticed it seems to be my core experience with eSync, especially as they're doing more delegation of information on sites.
Right.
So it's like I want to bring my friends in from Facebook and or Twitter and or whatever.
A more generic problem that Google is dealing with is trying to detect the set of computers used by multiple account owners and suggesting that maybe there are better ways to do this. So Google has another feature called multiple login where you can actually simultaneously be logged into multiple accounts at the same time. We find that of users who know about this, once they get used to it, they love it. But it's very hard for us to know who to promote this to. It's still a power user feature, but if on a device we can learn, there are multiple accounts frequently used with Google on this device, we can start promoting some of those more advanced features. So funny enough, while a lot of the work we did on the account user was initially driven by our experiences with OpenID, one of the main reasons we're deploying it is not because of OpenID. It's actually because of the common pattern of people having multiple accounts they use with Google on the same computer. We find it helps tremendously with that. Cool. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we just started this group to actually work on taking the specification, taking what we want. What? Sorry, what is that?
Technically, the run party, become the run party, the account user, or the run party for original ID?
The account user in some implementations is nothing but a JavaScript widget running on the relying party's website. So it doesn't. It's not actually a service. It is not at this point. Right. So right now, just logic running on the relying party. As we were sort of talking about earlier, there is definitely a longer-term goal, which InfoCard in particular focused on, which is, hey, a user should really only have to identify the common accounts they use on a device once. If you go to a website, it should at least have that list and you can pick from it. Doing that in a security, privacy-sensitive way is hard. There have been some ideas discussed in past IWs, and we'll discuss in the coming one, about actually having a common central domain where that information might be available, and that would definitely be able to play into this.
This is not that.
This is not that, yeah.
That is mostly RP-centric.
Very RP-centric at this point in time frame. So, as I said, our work in Google on this has mostly been based on past people either in this room and other companies who contributed. And so now we're trying to take all of the work that we've done, contribute back to the community, and get the community to help us actually tune this. So I just wanted to introduce people who are involved in this. So if you have time today, you might talk to them. So I wanted to start with just some of the Googlers in the room. So Bashir, Andy, Chuck, and Wade, you guys could stand up. So Bashir, who's right here in the black shirt, was a summer intern at Google, did a lot of work in this area. Unfortunately, we're losing him back to, what college in Atlanta?
Georgia Tech.
Yeah, so somebody go hire him, please. But he did a lot of work on the summer. Wade, too, is someone that, to be honest, historically, I've tried to keep from talking to you guys. He's our front-end lead on Google accounts, so has done most of our implementation in this area. And so if you actually want feedback on how hard was to do this, what were some of the hard pieces, a lot of that knowledge is in his brain. He's actually going to now spend a little bit more time at this event, the next IW, as well as trying to look at this spec to determine how we document it properly, his own best practices and experience. And then Andy is really good at designing user experiences, but doesn't seem to know how to use stairs. So Andy has actually been our lead UI UX designer on this since November of last year. I mean, it's almost coming up on a year. So Bashir was his intern this summer, and then Chuck Seifert, who's just moved from our Colorado office to Mountain View office. Chicago, okay, that was close. Is now taking over doing a lot of the actual CSS and HTML work, where we're actually doing it in 3 different ways. Number one, we're doing the CSS and HTML to put it in Google. The second one is we're putting it on this accountchooser.com website in the spec. And the third thing that I'll show you in a minute is something we call the Google Identity Toolkit. The other ones, and thanks Google, I appreciate that. Let's see, and then there are a couple other proposers for the working group. I think Pam, John, and Matt are here, but I don't think Alex. Is Kevin Long here? No. Okay, so, well, actually, I think everyone had met Pam, John, and Matt, so they will probably even need introductions. But if you're interested, in actually contributing to this or following it, feel free to grab one of us today or grab one of us at one of these upcoming events and ask questions or talk about how you can contribute. So, as we said, we're going to use this accountchooser.com website not just for descriptions of how to actually do the spec implementation, but our goal is actually to do some awareness generation of this. So the OpenID Foundation is now actually sort of reconstituting a marketing subcommittee to start working on raising awareness of both OpenID Connect, account chooser, and other techniques in this space. We actually have some money available, and we're looking for more members who want to be part of that marketing subcommittee. You don't have to be on the board to do it, you just have to be a member of the foundation. So if you're interested in that, please come and talk to me. This is one of the websites, like I say, that we'll be working on to try to raise awareness in the community. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is that Chuck's work with CSS and HTML is in 3 places. It's on accountchooser.com, it's in Google itself, and then the last thing is Google has this free service. It's very similar to JetMain or API called the Google Identity Toolkit. What it is we've taken the exact same infrastructure, I mean literally the same servers that Google uses to be a relying party to Microsoft, Yahoo, and AOL, and we just exposed the APIs that are used by that internally, we've exposed them externally. So you can literally run a website with exactly the same infrastructure that Google does. And to make that also consistent, we've taken the same CSS HTML we're using to be a line party, and we put it into a JavaScript widget that is currently available with this toolkit. There's also some advanced articles that document how you can just copy that JavaScript widget to your own website, point it to your own implementation. It has nothing to do with Google Identity Toolkit. Maybe use Janrain, give you a ping. Maybe you've done your own integration with identity providers specifically. And as I mentioned before, that's an area where we'd like to try to get more people interested in speccing what the interface would be of that type of JavaScript widget with the server-side implementation. Did Scott survive? Scott is still here. So the last thing, and any time check on? I think I have some 5 minutes. Yeah, we can do it. Okay. So the last thing I want to bring up, and Scott can walk up. So for those of you all who don't know, Scott Davids from K&L Gates, who acts as the legal representatives of the OpenID Foundation. I mentioned before that there's this sort of sign-in button that potentially, if this takes off, we'd like to actually mean something to users. And when they see it on the website, it means that, oh wow, I will probably be able to log in here much more simply than other ones, especially on mobile devices where nobody wants to go actually creating accounts. And so we found the K&L Gates to do some legal work to try to figure out what were the options for actually requiring the use of marks like this and restricting their use to only people who follow certain policies. And so why don't you talk about
Yeah, I'll talk to a couple of minutes on that issue, and let me back up for 1 second, and don't worry about the slide too much. We'll talk about that in a second. Really what we're talking about here is Google has a number of assets that they've been working on developing, and the interest in Don and the OpenID Foundation came to me and said, well, gee, if we want to do these programs in the future, what do we need? What do we need to get from Google? How's best to get it most safely for OpenID and for users, and also just most easily? One of the things that we realized is that we can do most of the availability can be through regular OpenID processes, and that's forming a working group, as Eric alluded to. That's been done. Then making contributions in the normal course under the OpenID regular rules that are used, kind of plain vanilla contribution, and that we realize we can just go that route. One of the things that we realize in looking at that is OpenID Foundation currently doesn't have elaborate trademark, certification mark provisions in its documentation. Let's back up for a quick second, and just talk about what marks are. Really what marks are is a trust signal, if you think about it. If you go into a store and you see 2 cans of corn, if one of them is a name brand, that's going to signal to you something about the quality of the food or whatever. So the idea is, what we're trying to do is use the marking convention, understand the marking convention as part of the process of getting people to understand that they can trust something that's reliable, predictable, etc. What trademarks, so we all have the distinction in our head, trademarks signal source of goods and services, but it's a signal of the source. Certification marks do something entirely different. It's still a mark, but what it's signaling is conformity to standards, third-party standards. For a certification mark, you typically have to have a set of standards that are accessible to people. You have to have independent kind of objective testing of whether the certification occurred, et cetera. So then that certification mark has some meaning for people. If there's objective testing, they know it's good. You can also have self-certification. We'll talk about that in a second. So in the account chooser setting, we had a situation where we said, well, gee, what do we want to do with the mark? And we're not really sure from the OpenID Foundation yet. We're not sure if the organization isn't sure if they want to do a elaborate third-party certification process, maybe self-certification in the interim. So the plan from the OpenID Foundation perspective, what we did is we said, well, gee, let's get a document in place, getting assurances from Google on the contribution. Again, it's a plain vanilla contribution, but under the regular OpenID document, when you make a contribution, when anybody makes a contribution, there are certain options that are available to the person making the contribution. So for instance, you can say, well, I'm going to make a contribution, but anybody who uses this, I want to get a reciprocal promise from the person who uses it, for instance. Or you can revoke in certain circumstances, a bunch of things that a contributor can do. What we did is crafted a document to kind of remove some of those things remove the options from Google, essentially, saying, okay, you're making this contribution, but we really want to lock this down. We want to know exactly what it's going to be like. So you'll have less rights than other contributors, essentially, to OpenID Foundation. And that was a document we put together just to give additional assurances to OpenID. Nothing really dramatic in there, but just kind of a cleanup thing. And then what we realize is the current thinking is that with a mark in its current status, the mark in its current status is not yet a trademark, it's not yet a certification mark, it hasn't been used that way. So essentially, when you create a mark, if I design a mark, what arises in that design is copyright interest. There aren't any trademark interests until it's either used in commerce or there's a filing made. So you essentially have this thing that's copyrightable made. There's a picture of it there. That may or it's probably copyrightable. It has enough elements of creativity in it that's probably copyrightable. So what the notion is that in one of the notions, and again, it's just as a proposal, it's not yet the baked plan, but is that we have, when the spec is finalized, that in the specification there can be an exhibit that has a picture of the button, let's say, and the notion may be to have people self-certify in the interim to that. So if they say, yes, I complied with the spec, and I'm going to self-certify and use the mark, that allows the enforcement of the mark in the interim. And then if there's interest as we move along in doing a more elaborate third-party kind of certification program, we will have preserved the mark because we'll be using it in that way. And then we can move to layers of elaboration for more third-party kind of testing against the specifications for the use of the mark. So that's a lot on the mark stuff, but wanted to mention it just because it's of all the things we could do in a plain vanilla way, we had to do a little bit more in order to get the rights available to OpenID Foundation so that it can do what, the reason OpenID Foundation is there is to make rights available to implementers so folks can get things done in a standardized way. And so that really covers that part. So what's going on here is just in the unrestricted marks versus restricted marks. Well, we had a conversation the other day, and this kind of a summary of some of that. It's some of it tracks with what I was just saying, but just let me go through it quickly. Unrestricted marks is basically saying we had that little mark but didn't do any enforcement, essentially. So you just kind of thrown it out there. And the idea, the first bullet point is saying, well, OIDF can buy or build, or not buy or build, but get or build itself. It's just a matter of how much it would cost. And then the second bullet point is if you use the mark but don't protect it, essentially you have an image and you own it. OIDF could own it, or Google could own it, or whoever. But if anyone can use it, it doesn't have any signal. There's no trust signal in it because people can use it willy-nilly without any kind of restriction. The specs can specify must use. The point there is what I was saying before, is that in the current thinking is that in the specification we'll have an exhibit, have a picture of the mark, and say, hey, if you satisfy these criteria, you can use the mark. And then in the last bullet point is saying it doesn't get you all the way there in a regular marking program, saying you really want to be specific about what it is and isn't representing. Because again, you're using it as a trust signal that people are seeing the mark and saying, aha, that means X to me. We want to define what X is. If we do a restricted mark notion, and that's again an enforcement associated with the marking convention, much more complicated is, again, I think it was deliciously complicated. It's not actually that much more complicated, but it's more complicated than doing nothing because you're doing something. Then the possible future goal, as I mentioned, we're not quite sure from the OpenID Foundation. We want to make sure it's something that serves the needs of the community most closely, and that's in development. As the spec gets finalized, as people get to thinking about how to use this thing, we can get a better idea of what we want to do in the marking program to support the ability of folks to be able to use this. And then may require an updated image. The idea there is, is a question that we haven't done searches on this to see if there's marking. A lot of people using keyholes, maybe the locksmiths are going to use a keyhole. And then also, as I mentioned, if we do a self-certification program, and then you decide to move to a third-party certification program, you probably want to make some changes to the mark. Otherwise, out there in the community, you'll have self-certified and third-party certified mixed and match, and people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. That could be something as simple as a different color, whatever. The conventions to be there, but that's the updated image notion. Sorry, I went through that really quickly. Any questions? Sorry. Yeah.
So the third-party certification is only in the context of IDP certification, right?
Well, this would actually be of the relying party. I mean, if our goal, if we decided it's a goal, if the foundation is for a user to go to a website, a relying party website, and if they said that, it means something. It means I'm going to be able to sign in without having to type a password. It's more about what the relying party is doing as opposed to identity provider is doing.
And you can have you can use a certification mark for any performance or any party, depending on what you need in the spec. So the way to think about it is to disassemble it is to say, what do we need for the system to work reliably? And then what roles are there of people in that system? And then which ones of those people do we need to act reliably for the system to act reliably? Then what you do is you impose behaviors on them in legal fashion saying if you're using this, then you must do X. And then you have an ability to enforce it. To the extent they don't do that part of that bargain, and they don't keep that part of the bargain, then you have an ability to enforce. So it can be against any party as necessary to make the system more reliable. Yeah,
So my question is to the current state of play. How much work has already gone into the evaluation of this app, this photo work, to see that it isn't the full stop? That someone else already owns the
Honestly, the particular image is one we like, but not the one that, that particular one doesn't have to be the one. We're more interested in actually finding what would be the right process to take any particular image. Also, because they're almost certainly going to end up being multiple images. Like, one image may, imply that a line party does A, B, and C. Another one might imply it does only A and B.
So then the work stream is to evaluate a potential solution that could be trademarked.
Correct.
Doing all that work. So is that work stream already been approved by the board to spend money on, or?
Who agreed to be on that committee? So Mike Jones, Nat, and myself are on a committee to sort of track that and represent the foundation. We're paying out rates to do more of that. Like I said, he's already been doing some. And I'd say Microsoft and Mike Jones in particular has some good experience going through the logo for the Infocard Foundation. We were learning some stuff last night about the history of the OpenID logo itself. So we're trying to learn from those past experiences as well. Cool. All right, so I think we're good on that. I still have to talk 2 more times today. I'm actually already starting to lose my voice. Like I say, if you guys have feedback on this, especially Google things, Wei is really a good person to talk to about the logic and functionality of the flow. Andy and Chuck in particular, just because we're losing Bashir. If you have questions on the UI or suggestions on it, please go to them. In particular, like I say, this is an attempt to aggregate best practices and not repeat failed practices from others. So if there are things you saw here where you can suggest enhancements to the UI or things that take away, please get in touch with them here at a future event. Great, thanks.
So if you're going to clap for Eric, please pretend there's a fly.
Yeah. I think I got it.